Good evening. Britain lost a princess today. A young woman described by all to whom she reached out as irreplaceable. An early morning car crash in a Paris underpass ended a life with more than its share of pain and courage, warmth and compassion. Just over 2 hours ago, an RAF plane brought her home for the last time to an RAF base in West London. Brian Hanrahan was there.
The princess's body was brought home with royal ceremonial. A BA-146 of the Royal Squadron landed at RAF Northolt into the setting sun. Waiting to receive it were the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary. The procedure used was drawn up years ago in the event of a death of a member of the royal family abroad, but not used until today. Aboard the plane were Prince Charles and the Princess's two sisters, who'd flown to Paris to escort her body home. The coffin, draped in the standard of the royal family, was carried from the plane by members of the Queen's Squadron of the RAF Regiment. It was a silent ceremony, no drums, no bands, no speeches. Prince Charles and her two sisters, Lady Jane Fellows and Lady Sarah McCorquodale, stood on the blustery tarmac as the coffin was placed in the hearse, with a single family wreath on top. Flowers from other members of the family, including those from the Prince of Wales, were placed alongside it. Afterwards, the mourners parted, the two sisters continuing the coffin to a private mortuary in London. Prince Charles stayed to fly back to Balmoral to join their two sons. The ceremony inside RAF Northolt was private, attended only by official guests. But outside, thousands waited along the route into London. There'll be much pressure for public mourning for the princess who captured many hearts, and in her sudden, unexpected death continues to attract great public attention. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, RAF Northolt.
By all accounts, the last hours of the princess's life were among the happiest of recent months. She dined with the new love in her life, Dodi Fayed, but within minutes a horrific crash ended the dream, leaving him and their driver dead and the princess fatally injured. As the battle to save her life was lost and the reality of her passing hit home, the wave of shock and grief touched many around the world. Our chief news correspondent, Kate Adey, reports from Paris.
The crash was at high speed and horrific. Just after midnight, the black Mercedes hit the curb, cannoned into a concrete pillar of an underpass, then bounced into the side wall. The French authorities say the driver had lost control and was going at twice, possibly 3 times the speed limit. The impact killed Dodi Al-Fayed immediately and his driver. The princess and her British bodyguard had to be cut from the wreckage. The emergency services arrived quickly and were reportedly appalled at the scene. It took over an hour to free the princess, during which time she received emergency treatment. First reports had described her as having arm and thigh injuries and concussion. She was taken to La Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, and at that time the gravity of her condition was not publicly known. She had massive chest injuries and suffered a heart attack shortly after arrival.
Malgré la fermeture de cette plaie et un massage cardiaque.
For 2 hours, the doctors had tried desperately to save her, but despite their efforts, she died at 4 in the morning. By then, the royal family and both British and French governments had been informed of the situation. The French Prime Minister led his country's tributes.
Je sais que les Français ont toujours été séduits par son charme.
The French people were captivated by her charm, humanity and personality. We of course express our condolences to our friends of the United Kingdom.
As the news spread, the British ambassador added his words.
The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends, and with the family and friends of the others who died in the accident.
The Princess of Wales and Dodi Al Fayed had begun their evening with dinner at the Ritz Hotel. Photographers, the persistent paparazzi, were outside. So the Mercedes driver, with the bodyguard in the front, collected the couple at a rear entrance, then headed towards a villa owned by the Fayed family across the river. 7 photographers set off in pursuit on motorcycles. There are several witnesses to the chase, and the 7 photographers are now in police custody, some apparently having taken pictures of the crash. The main witness will be Trevor Rhys-Jones, the bodyguard, who has injuries to his head and lungs. The site of the accident is a mundane traffic tunnel in the centre of the city. For those who have come to look, there is very little to convey what happened here. Perhaps this has added to the sense of disbelief and shock that is very evident. All day there has been a constant stream to the spot. Tourists, Parisians, travellers, French citizens, Japanese students, American soldiers, British holidaymakers. Most could not find words enough to express their feelings. The messages with the flowers were in many languages. From the roadside spot, ripples of grief spread wide. And amid the emotion, the journey home had to be prepared. The French President, Monsieur Chirac, greeting Prince Charles, who'd arrived at the hospital in the late afternoon. A short time later, with a French honour guard in attendance, the coffin of Diana, Princess of Wales, was borne from the hospital, followed by the Prince of Wales and the sisters of the Princess, Jane and Sarah. At a quiet military airport west of Paris, the RAF took over. A slow progress to an aircraft of the Queen's flight. And a few flowers for the journey. There is shock in France and rage at the circumstances of the accident, and there is sadness. Kate Adie, BBC News, Paris.
Throughout the day, thousands of people gathered to pay their respects outside Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, the Princess's London home. And there have been special church services to remember Diana and those who died with her. David Loyne reports on the death that left so many stunned.
Tonight, Kensington Palace, the London home of the Princess of Wales, was the focus of the nation's grief. Wave upon wave of flowers piled as high as they could go. This morning, even by the time they came to change the guard at Buckingham Palace, a more sombre affair than usual, the pavement outside was already a sea of flowers. Diana knew she would never live here as queen, but there was real emotion, perhaps fulfilling her hope that she would be queen in people's hearts.
Everybody loves Diana. I think she's someone that every young woman probably wanted to be. She was a wonderful person, beautiful. She was just a lovely person. We all hoped that we could be like her.
I just heard that she died, and I was so upset, and I cried a lot.
In St Paul's Cathedral, as in churches up and down the land, there were special prayers of remembrance, with added poignancy here, where the marriage began 16 years ago.
Many of us recall the Archbishop of Canterbury saying at that service, "This is the stuff of which fairy tales are made." But as the story unfolded, as the tale was told, there was a dimension of tragedy.
Leaders are still trying to make sense of the way Diana's life was cut short so dramatically.
She had a faith in God, although she wasn't the kind of person who wore religion on her sleeves. There was a deep faith there going on. And her relationship with Mother Teresa, for example, was one of the she spoke to me about. So we cope, I think, by holding on to the things that she believed in.
I think in many ways she had quite a lot of sadness in her life, but she will be remembered by the very considerable amount of good which she did. And I'm thinking not only recently on the question of landmines, but on the question also of the homeless, especially the young homeless.
Diana's